Hey, Creep Cole. Welcome to your Patreon weekly bonus episode. We're back with some more Alphabet Roulette. And this letter was S. And so we're talking about Spirited Away.
Man, that's so crazy. We haven't talked about any animation, not even recently.
Especially not
like a month ago.
Ghibli.
Yeah. No, I was very excited that this was the choice because I love this movie. So
I think
thanks for bringing it to the table, John.
This might be the end of animation for the show.
Hey.
Maybe?
Never say never.
Okay, fair enough, because we have said that like 3 times.
We'll find out. We'll find out.
We got a few letters left in the alphabet. You never know.
Yeah, so Spirited Away. If you haven't seen it, then this is going to be an interesting conversation for you.
Yeah. So written and directed by our longtime friend now, Hayao Miyazaki from Studio Ghibli. I was talking to a coworker the other day and was saying, my podcast, we just got done doing a Studio Ghibli month, and then immediately got super self-conscious that I had said it wrong. I was like, is it Ghibli? And I didn't, I was trying to read the response of my coworker, and I was like, I have no fucking clue. Maybe I said it wrong. Who cares?
But nobody knows.
Yeah, this movie came out in 2001 in Japan. It is about 2 hours long, and the cast is... as Chihiro, or Sen, is Devay Chase, which I knew I recognized her name, or I knew I recognized her voice throughout the movie, and I could not realize who it was. It is the girl that played Samara in The Ring, and played Donnie's little sister Samantha in Donnie Darko. So I was like, that's cool. Little horror connection there.
She only plays characters that start with S.A. or what?
Yeah, and that have some sort of like spiritual connection to another world. And she is honestly probably the most recognizable name in this cast outside of John Ratzenberger. But Haku is played by Jason Marsden, who at first I was like, is that the Marsden that I'm thinking about? But it's not. It's some dude who is a voice actor for a bunch of other anime, Fairly Odd Parents. Voiced Max Goof in the 1995 Goofy movie. He's the official voice.
He's been in things like Boy Meets World and shit like that as well.
Oh, yeah, I do recognize this fucker's face. Yeah.
Let me see.
Yeah.
I don't know how well you recognize him in his current state, but
Oh, that fucking guy?
Yeah, that fucking guy.
it's not the boy that met the world.
He
but one
was
of them other
he was
boys.
like he was Eric's right-hand man for like the first couple seasons of that show.
Yeah.
My number one guy. Yubaba and Zaniba are voiced by Suzanne Plachette, who was a very famous actress, most known for The Birds in 1963. Bards. And she passed away shortly after this. She recorded for this movie. Kamaji is David Ogden Stiers, and then a bunch of other people
And that's
who
the
you won't
American
recognize.
cast.
That's the American
The
cast,
dubbed version.
because that is the version that we watched. Again, for Studio Ghibli movies, I tend to go for the American cast just because they cast really talented voice actors in their movies. So, yeah. But, John, you want to give us a quick little rundown of what the fuck this movie's about?
Yeah.
You can.
Essentially, I'll refer to her as Sen because it's easier to pronounce. Sen and her family are moving from one city to another. She's not very excited about this. They're in the car, on the move, trying to catch up to the movers, and then they end up making a wrong turn, and they run into some real Zelda-looking shit, and vice versa. Zelda looks like this shit. Like a little statue, like a little cherub-like statue. And then they have to get out of the car. They walk through a tunnel, and they are transported into this, like, basically looks like a rundown amusement park. And then from there, the parents smell some delicious foods. They start mowing down on these foods. Sen is like, I'm not vibing with the food, and continues to walk away, and she runs into a boy, and she's like, I know this boy, but I can't figure it out. And then comes back to the parents, and they've turned into giant monstrous pigs. And then from there, some crazy shit ensues. She's basically transported into this completely different world, where these like really weird creatures and all these.
World.
It's like a spirit realm.
You could almost say she gets
Spirited away. Yeah. And then from there, she has to get a job, so that way she can still live among this spirit realm.
Even when you're dead, you have to keep working.
And then
I tell you.
and so from there, she's basically trying to work long enough so that she can figure out how she can turn her parents back and go back to her normal life.
Thank you, John. You did the best I think a human can do.
And what's it really about, John?
Lots of stuff.
Yeah.
But mostly anxieties about change, moving when you're young is always a very scary thing. I used to, basically when I discovered I had an anxiety disorder was when my family, when I was like 12, 13 years old, decided we were all going to up and move to Colorado. And we spent the entire summer going to Colorado and looking at places. And I didn't want to go because I was about to go into high school and I had a lot of friends and not a lot of friends. I had a couple friends and I had
a handful of friends.
And I had
a friend.
Yeah, I had attachments here, and I started breaking out into really intense hives throughout the entire trip, and we could not figure out why. And then when we got back, and because the housing market was so shit at the time, we couldn't sell our house. All that shit went away when my anxiety went away, and we realized it was an anxiety thing. And instead of hives, her anxieties manifest as different spirit characters throughout the spirit world. Also just anxieties about growing up. There's a lot of commentary on, yeah, when you become an adult, you have to do lame, annoying shit like beg people for a job and work in shitty situations for other people. And there's this whole commentary on the gluttony of America specifically is what Miyazaki was trying to point out, but really just the gluttony of like capitalist, consumerist society with the parents turning into pigs and all of that stuff.
And the gold.
And the
Yeah.
gold,
From the no face.
Themes of loneliness. We have the no face spirit whose whole bit is about having kind of like attachment issues, where he doesn't really know who he or it is without another person to kind of be like trying to please and all of this stuff. And so just a lot of the fears about that childhood transition into adulthood. Sen is at an age where she's soon to become a woman, and that was the first hint to me that this had some sort of Pixar connection, because to me that's like the plot of now every Pixar movie, because they're all the same, but something like Inside Out.
Yeah,
that's the whole story of Inside Out, is she's moving to a new city, she doesn't want to, and
totally.
her emotions about that manifest into these characters. So yeah, just handled in a slightly different, more cartoony way in Pixar's case. But John Lasseter, the Pixar dude, was a producer on this because he loved Miyazaki's previous work, and took this movie and showed it to everybody at Pixar and said, this is where I want the studio to kind of go. So this movie is a large part of why Pixar movies since Spirited Away have felt like Spirited Away. It's because they are just trying to take inspiration. It's like every single animated thing I look up now, if you go into the Wikipedia description, there's a section that says the artists were inspired by Studio Ghibli and Princess Mononoke. I watched a movie last night called The Secret of Kells. It's by the studio that's been nominated every year for, they did one called Song of the Sea, and then a movie called Wolfwalkers.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that one's fucking dope.
And all three movies are based on Irish folklore, and the animation is fucking gorgeous. And the whole time I was watching it, I was like, oh, this is the Irish version of Studio Ghibli, like doing this work. And then I go into the researching it, and they're like, yeah, we basically wanted to do our version of Princess Mononoke with this movie.
And the Pixar thing makes sense because not only is it a lot of the coming of age stuff, but a lot of those Pixar movies too, like for instance WALL-E, which we recently talked about, has this deeper message. Like, yeah, you could take it as the total surface level, but what's WALL-E really about? Environmentalism and consumerism, and that's a benchmark for these Ghibli movies.
And that's the environmentalism thing especially carries over through pretty much all of at least this later period. I don't know as much in like things like Kiki's or Totoro, but I know in these movies obviously that we've been talking about from Ghibli, you have the like mud stink spirit thing that comes in, and when they finally like figure out what's wrong with it and pull out that bike, then it's all this human trash that comes spilling out of it. And then we find out, spoilers if you haven't seen the movie, I would highly recommend stopping what you're doing, checking it out. It's on Max, both in English and in Japanese.
HBO.
No, it's the place to watch HBO. And
yeah, HBO.
Yeah, so go check it out, but spoilers. And then at the end we find out that Haku is his actual name, who he actually is this river.
Yeah.
He's a river spirit.
Yeah, that's since disappeared because it's been built on and
destroyed by humanity.
And so he has lost his name in that his river, he no longer exists as the entity that he was, so it's just his spirit of that river, which is weird and cool and crazy.
I mean, that's what this movie is. On the surface, is weird as shit. Like, this movie is just fucking weird, and it doesn't do any hand holding. It just kind of throws you in, and there's like people that look like people, but then they're spirits, but then it's never really explained. And so like, oh, you're human. It's like, well, what are you?
Yeah.
At the time.
I mean, part of it is kind of explained in a small sense. Most of the humans that are there because of one reason or another, and at that point, they've lost like the ability to know their own name and can't get back.
Which I thought was I'd forgotten about that aspect, and I think that's such a cool, interesting idea. Is that like, the longer they're in this spirit world, the harder it is for them to remember what their name is, and their name is like their entire self. So once they forget that name, they like completely forget who they were, and it starts happening super quickly to Sen once she's called Sen, which I guess like her Chihiro and Sen both mean, I think it's like something to do with 1,000, and Sen is just like the word 1,000 taken out of the longer sentence, and it's a way of kind of like, again, making her like almost giving her a number, basically.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to call you Sen. We're going to take away like what makes your name special and just call you like 1,000. And that's the whole bit. And pretty much immediately after she loses her name, she starts to forget what her original name was.
She goes back to her parents who are in
it's Sen.
Yeah.
And I immediately was like, oh shit.
She's already getting stuck in it. But I think a lot of where we kind of head with this movie is to see like the message of like, don't grow up too fast, because there are all these people and they have all these spirits have these like ulterior motives, and they all like are trying to get gold from the no face, or they're like trying to rip each other off or do these crazy things or steal stuff from each other. And like, she is young and innocent and just wants to help people.
And to touch on kind of what you're talking about with the no face in that regard specifically, when you're a kid, money doesn't really mean anything to you. Like, you have to learn that money is valuable and money is important. So when she's encountered this no face, he's like, you want some gold? And she's like, no, I don't give a shit. And all the adults are like, let's go get the fucking gold. And she's like, I have no need for that.
Yeah, she's just trying to help out. Like, she lets him in, and then he like continues like the entire time to try to give her things, or like, well, is this what you want? Is this what you want? She's like, no, I helped you because I think it's the right thing to do, basically.
And no payoff.
I'm not looking to be paid. You were cold and in the rain, and I wanted to help you. That's it.
Yeah, immediately I was like, oh, he's the incel ghost. And like, I mean, obviously at the time that term didn't exist, but like, I got those vibes of like, because an incel would kind of do the same sort of thing. I was like, but I have I have all this money. Like, I have all these things that don't really mean anything on a human level, but I think they make me look special and make me look cool. But then on top of all of that, the bathhouse is kind of like this. It's kind of this place that corrupts people. Like, it corrupts the spirits. It seems like the longer they stay, especially No Face. Like, when he first shows up, he seems completely innocent. Like, he's just kind of watching Sen as she's running across the bridge and talking to Haku. But then once he gets into the bathhouse, he starts like mapping all of the shitty traits, like because he's literally eating people, and when he eats them, he's absorbing traits and becoming this big like crazy monster. And so it's like he's absorbing all of the bad vibes and bad like like you said, the ulterior motives of all of these other spirits that are in here. And when they're finally able to get him out and have him basically be a mirror to someone who just wants to like take care of him and have him help out and give him a purpose, then he's totally chill again, and it's cool. And it's really sweet at the end, because really like you could forget that he's supposed to be tragic, because in the middle he turns into a giant fucking monster. So you're just like, oh, is he the bad guy? And it's like, no, he's just misunderstood.
Yeah. Well, it's
like a lot of lonely people who don't really know how to interact with people in society.
But like, there's other characters that are the same way. Once they're pulled away from this like corrupting force of like this giant beacon to capitalism, the bathhouse, like the baby is taken away and is like,
and chooses to stay a rat, doesn't she? Or like a or something. She becomes an animal and then chooses to stay that way.
In part way through, yes, because they're like, we can fix you, and they're like, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
But I think at the very end is changed back. But it's at that point like
So am I under the correct? Am I under the correct impression that both of the sisters are the same? That they're one spirit, or that they're one person? Because
I mean, they look exactly the same.
Well, because they look exactly the same, they're dressed exactly the same, And to me, the idea was supposed to be that there's some like bigger spirit logic going on here that that they know about, because when she says, "Oh, I'm going to give her one final test," in my mind, the real test wasn't what happens when she gets back. It's that she knew she was going to go meet her sister, and that there was going to be like something going. And I don't know if she's going to be tested to like look past the fact that they looked the same. But when she leaves at the end, she calls that sister other sister's name. She calls her Granny, which is what she called the nice one. So to me, that was Sen or Chihiro like acknowledging that she knew they were the same person. And
could be like a Piccolo Kami situation where like at some point in time, because of like these like diverging wants, that like the one spirit was separated into two.
I kind of took it as that the bad one was starting to change. And so since Sen noticed that, she'd call her Granny, like, okay, now you're good.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean,
I didn't see anything definitive when I was looking into it, and I'm sure people have all kinds of theories, and that's the point.
So probably
but in my head, I was like,
yeah.
oh, maybe the idea was that like she kind of knows how to test these spirits, and if they're worthy of getting out of this place, then they eventually get to get out at the end, and she gets to go back to her parents.
It could be like, yeah, like there's two sides of every person. There's a good part of you, and there's an evil part of you, and it kind of just depends on what you're going to let flourish.
It's the old the Full Metal Jacket reference, the duality of man.
Yeah,
Could be.
Well, and also to me, like when I think bathhouse, I think sex workers. I think
Prostitutes,
yeah, which is the American version of a bathhouse.
Like an onsen is more like what this probably is.
Yeah, and Miyazaki, like people had brought that up, like, oh, was that your intention? And he was like, no, because bathhouses, especially like on the ones we're modeling this one after, like ancient bathhouses, like that wasn't the bit, it was genuinely just a place to go take a bath. And so he was
Almost like a spa nowadays.
yeah, and he was like, that wasn't on my mind, but in my head, I think it lends to this whole like place being a corruption, and it's kind of like this force of adulthood fears, and one of those adulthood fears would be sexuality and mixing that with money, and I'm saying monetization. But yeah, and so like I kind of thought that lended itself to the plot, even if that wasn't his intention. And we haven't even really talked about like the boiler room guy, the like creepy fucking spider guy that runs the furnace.
Master Roshi with 8 arms or whatever.
Yeah, did that give you the heebies or the jeebies at all?
No. I liked her interaction with him, and like towards the end, like you could tell like he had good intentions. And I don't think it's necessarily that he had good intentions. I think that as you interact with Chihiro, I think that like similar to how if you interact with the Baba, you like get corrupted.
Mm-hmm.
When you interact with her, you start to become more innocent and become more like good-hearted. And that's like all the characters that she meets and spends a longer time with, they all like start to really show great traits and like do things to help others without like the want or need for things in return, which I think is fully intentional.
I like that a lot, and because I hadn't even really thought about it that way, but that totally makes sense. In my head, I was thinking like he to me is the most he's like the spirit that's the most become almost a literal cog in this machine of this spirit world. And so Chihiro kind of shows him like, oh, there is a different path, not necessarily that he's going to leave what he's doing, but that kind of shows him like, oh, this isn't like because when she first meets him, he refuses to even acknowledge that she's there, and she has to kind of like eventually, with the help of the other chick, has to like kind of break his focus away from what he's doing.
Well, and the soot sprites too. Yeah,
and the soot sprites, and even that, it's like, oh, that's probably some commentary on this whole idea of like, oh, well, rather than getting, hardworking people, I'm gonna find a way to like shortcut the work process. And he obviously has all of the arms because that's how we all feel when we're doing 100 things at once, and we wish we had more arms.
Yeah,
could be commentary on like automation as well too, right?
Yeah, it's a very assembly line, but with one dude running it, and then a bunch of these little soot sprite things that are just like every Ghibli movie has to have some little like iconographic toy thing, thing you can some weirdos can get tattooed on them.
That's the most true thing you've ever said. He reminded me of the professor from Little Nemo. Tall, little, gangly. And that's not the only thing. I feel like there's a bunch of different stuff in this that reminded me of Nemo, just because it's weird and dreamlike. And
Yeah, I was definitely getting hardcore Nemo vibes, and I feel like I get that from a lot of stuff we watch now, which is just another reason why I'm glad we checked that movie out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this movie has shown up on multiple lists as being the best animated movie ever made.
Oh, really?
And I think I agree.
I wouldn't say I agree necessarily. I think it's in the rotation of things that I would say could exist at that number one spot.
An argument could be made.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I mean, and the reason I say that, or I could say that, is because as much as I love Mononoke, and there can be an argument there that maybe Mononoke as like an epic is grander in scale and does more, but to me, like, because of the creepy aspects of this and the spirit aspects of it, it just plays to my sensibilities and the bizarre nature of it. Like, all Ghibli movies have some confusing, bizarre stuff that happens, but this one really leans into all of that. And part of that is that Miyazaki doesn't script his movies ahead of time. He writes the story as he draws the entire movie basically, and just draws it basically stream of consciousness where he thinks the story should go from a certain point, and that's, you know, explains a lot of why narratively they're not super easy. This one's not super easy to follow. I wouldn't say it's near impossible or anything. Like,
no.
But as a kid, I remember going like, what the fuck is this? Because this was the first Ghibli movie I had seen when they showed it on Cartoon Network. And my sister was obsessed with the movie after we saw it. And I was like, I don't know how I felt about that. Like, I don't really know what it was about or what was going on. And so, yeah, it took a while to grow on me. But yeah, for me, I would say
now
that
it's
this is
grown on you quite a bit.
yeah, quite literally. Yeah, for me, I would say this is at least my favorite. This is my favorite Ghibli movie, and again, potentially you know, maybe holding Into the Spider-Verse, you know, in competition. I would say that this is, to me, top 3 best animated movies ever made.
Yeah, like I said, I think the argument could be made for number one. I mean, I would be hard pressed to select a one thing, because I feel like there are a lot of animated movies that do different things for me. But this is a fantastic film, and I think that one of the things that always seem to be done well, but for Studio Ghibli in general, but specifically in this case, is the iconography. Like, the images of like the no face, like her in the no face, yeah. that one cell is like iconic.
Yeah, there's like the whole lo-fi YouTube radio station that's just the scene of them sitting on the train together.
Yeah,
just like on loop. And when I got to that scene, I was like, oh, I'm in the mood for some lo-fi hip hop.
Yeah,
but yeah, and then I just love the way that the movie wraps up, where you get you're kind of worried for a little bit that once they get back through the tunnel, that it's going to be, you know, I made a lot of comparisons to The Wizard of Oz, but you're afraid that when she gets back, she's going to have that Dorothy moment where she realizes, like, oh, did I really just dream this all? Because that dude kind of looks like the Tin Man, and that dude kind of looks like this. This movie doesn't do that. They get back to the car, and the car's all overgrown, and everything's dusty, and
they've been there for a minute.
Yeah, and she knows, like, oh, we've been here for a long time, but her parents are like, what's going on? Like, everything's all weird. Like, did somebody do this as a prank? And the movie just kind of ends on that note, but you know, because you went on that adventure with her. You know she ain't lying. But yeah, I think Wizard of Oz is a huge comparison to Alice in Wonderland, obviously, with going through the rabbit hole, through the tunnel into this world, with all the kooky characters and the illogical shit going on, very Alice in Wonderland, but then with the different witches, like the good witch and the evil witch, very Wizard of Oz, the special shoes, like there's a lot of attention paid to her shoes throughout the movie, so lots of classic fairy tale influences coming in.
Yeah.
The little frog guy reminded me of Super Mario Odyssey. At one point, you turn into a little frog.
Yeah, with a mustache.
Yeah.
Mustache and a hat.
Or Meet the Robinsons, which I guess would go back to Disney Pixar.
Yeah.
Disney Pixar. But yeah, that's about all I got to say about that. Great movie.
I couldn't recommend it higher.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing it to the table, John.
It's so fucking good, dude. I recommend it. I recommend it so much.
Yeah, see, you recommended it higher. There we go. All right, that's going to wrap it up for our discussion on Spirited Away. We're going to move into Spinning That Wheel of Endless Possibility.
For the letter T.
Today, Junior.
T-double-E-double-R-double-I-double-F-double-I-double-C-C-C.
John went with...
I went with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, and I went with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2. Secret of the Ooze.
And I went with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Actually, I went with Tremors.
Colon tremors.
Tremors.
Colon tremors.
Ooh.
Whoa.
Those turtles better see a doctor.
Yep.
Who's going to be like, what the fuck am I looking at? This is a mutant turtle.
Spinning that wheel, spinning that wheel. And Tremors is the movie we will be watching.
Yeah, finally Anthony gets a win on the wheel.
Nice. All right.
Tremors will be an interesting watch. And I think I
honestly, if it wasn't going to be here, we would have had to have covered it.
Yeah, I was going to say, if it didn't show up here, I would have added it to the list of things we have to cover before the end of the show.
Speaking of that list, we are trying to cover at least a little bit of everything. So if there's something throughout the entire run of the show that we have not covered that you're like, dude, you guys got to cover a part of this franchise or something like that, then please let us know. Hey,
Can't be something crazy like, oh, I really wish you guys had talked about the entire Metal Gear Solid franchise. You know, keep it.
Why are you calling Steven out like this?
Because I know Steven's probably one of the only people who would be watching this. You can't tell us that we need to watch all of Supernatural, Ashley, because it's not attainable.
Good.
We only have a couple months,
but I could have.
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah, if there's a director or an actor or a franchise, let us know so we can try to get that done ASAP.
I'd love to do at least one more episode where we have to fucking study some shit and learn some history.
Oh, yeah, totally. We'll chat about it.
We'll
figure it out.
Anyway, outside of that, if you haven't checked out our regular episode, please do so. We're talking about Deep Impact,
yes,
and Armageddon.
You can want to call it Deep Contact, and I was like, no, that's probably more akin to Armageddon.
Oh, I watched Deep Throat. Was I not supposed to?
That's
Wrong
also
movie.
a different movie.
Wrong movie.
All right, well, we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.
Keep it creepy.